Welcome, fans of Star Trek, to episode 2 of the Captain's Yacht, the podcast that takes you on a tour of Star Trek The Next Generation, episode by episode. Join us as we board the yacht for a 3-episode excursion this week into TNG's Season 1, including Code of Honor, The Last Outpost, and Where No One Has Gone Before. My name is @ScholarBeta on all social media, and I am joined by my co-host,
Captain Kanaka. Good to see you all. E como mai, as they say in Hawaiian, and welcome.
Hey, let's do a quick recap. I'll get us started here of what we talked about last episode. I just want to remind the listeners that this podcast is put together by 2 teachers, and it's designed as an experiment in experiential learning. And my ultimate goal is to encourage my students to get out there and create without striving for perfection, without striving for, having all sorts of technical ability. No, I just want them to get out there and learn by doing. So, hey, this podcast is a model in that process, and I'm extremely excited to be joined by a co-host who's on this exploration with me.
And I, as a social studies teacher who has done some experiential learning too, I want to second everything that our resident scholar has said. I am very big on experiential learning, culturally responsive learning. Anything that does not involve reading directly from a book is definitely good for students. So I am absolutely thrilled to be on this adventure with you, Scholar Beta.
Hey, thank you. And I know we're just getting started on our adventure, but I want to propose another side quest really fast. And that is a special episode where we actually talk about all the pilots from the Roddenberry Berman era. We talked about what our favorite pilot was last time. I threw Emissary under the table, and then I started watching Deep Space Nine all last week, and I thought, okay, I want a special episode. We can sit down and talk about what works and what doesn't work about all these pilots, because they're all amazing. Caretaker's amazing. Encounter at Farpoint's amazing. There's a lot of good stuff out there. So, hey, I'm going to put that on the calendar for sometime late 2020, okay?
Awesome. I'd love to do that. So with that in mind, as we continue our recap here, here's a little section that in Hawaiian, the phrase "e kala mai" means "I'm sorry" in Hawaiian, which is when we fix a goof. During our talk about characters and who auditioned for whom, our resident scholar pointed out that Patrick Stewart was reading for Data, and the thought of him doing that was so outlandish and just did not compute in my head. I wasn't sure, and I casted doubt. And with that in mind, I wanted to clarify that Patrick Stewart did read for Data originally, as did another actor that we're going to be talking about in today's episode. And after doing further research for this, Patrick Stewart originally wasn't even in the top 3 to play Captain Picard. The front runner was Mitch Ryan, character actor who you might recognize as Dr. Wynn from Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers.
Wow.
Yeah. Yes.
What a film. Yeah, that's right.
Oh, yes. That psychiatrist was going to be Captain Picard originally. Edward James Olmos, Battlestar Galactica fame, and one of my favorite movies, Stand and Deliver. He was considered for the role. It's probably good that he didn't get the role, because if Olmos had played Picard, he probably wouldn't be in Stand and Deliver, because Next Generation came out in 87 and Stand and Deliver came out in 88. And Scholar Beta, I think you have some praise for Mr.
Edward
Olmos.
I just want to say that, yeah, he is an amazing captain, and I think you could have done an amazing job here. But you should look at some production footage. Obviously, I know you've seen Stand and Deliver, but take a look at what Edward James Olmos looks like in 88 versus like the early aughts where he plays Admiral Adama or Captain Adama. Oops, sorry, a little spoiler there for folks who haven't seen Battlestar Galactica. But hey, Edward James Olmos, just want to give him a shout out. Incredible actor. Love Stand and Deliver as well. Never took that AP test, but I can definitely appreciate what he's doing in that film. I think there's
Definitely.
one other actor, right, that read for Picard that you want to
Yes,
mention?
there is Yaphet Kotto, who you may remember if you are acquainted with the Alien universe. He played Parker, one of my favorite characters in that universe. I absolutely love Parker, and that is kind of works as a segue to our first conversation, which is
That's
if
right. Let's
Kodo if Kodo was playing Picard, this first episode we're reviewing would be changed completely in terms of subtext. So with that in mind, before we get into this, one little rule that we've added to keep us on schedule, we have a 30-minute timer. Which means we're not just going to ramble on and on like we did for the first our pilot episode for
That's right. Yep.
2 hours. For those of you who are interested, we will produce lighter versions, which we break it down episode by episode. And this will be the prototype for that. So 30 minutes, and you will know when we're done because we will literally be beamed out of the episode, courtesy of sound effects. So with that in mind, 30 minutes, engage. So we are talking Code of Honor, the infamous episode Code of Honor. My goodness. Now,
That's right.
go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. And we're working on our sharing the mic as well for our dear viewers. I just was hoping you were going to start off by reading the start date too before you launch into behind the scene, to make it an official introduction to this
Well,
episode.
of course. So, for those of you who are interested, folks, there is a special code behind the star date. I don't know if our resident scholar is familiar with that. He says he is. So, with that in mind, the star date is 41235.25. As a historian, it might be an interesting way to note that the way you break this down, if a star date starts with 4, it takes place in the 24th century originally. 1 deals with season 1. And then because there's about 24 episodes in a season, you look for the penultimate number to see where you are. So this is the 3rd episode technically, so it's 41235.25. So with that in mind, this script, folks, oh boy. In terms of our current climate right now, it's kind of strange, but you take a look at the original script and it bears very little resemblance to the episode that we actually got. The original script was written to include reptilian aliens based on the samurai culture, completely indistinguishable from humans. That concept, I would bet money, was dropped because of budgetary reasons. That first season, rather, $3 million had to be cut, and I can guarantee you that the creature effects were cut there. The episode's director, Russ Mayberry, insisted on the actors playing the Lingonians be African American actors, which raised a lot of eyebrows, including Gene Roddenberry's. So much so that because of Mayberry's insensitive treatments of the subject matter, or rather the subtext, Gene Roddenberry actually fired Mayberry halfway through production, and the assistant director, Les Landau, was responsible for finishing the episode but wasn't credited. So in keeping with what we talked about last time, every episode starts with a little behind the scenes stuff, and this one's definitely something to write home about, folks, because this was really chaotic. So with that in mind, our resident scholar is going to tell us the premise and tropes of this episode. So take it away.
Absolutely. So the plan. So let's talk about what actually happens in this episode. I appreciate the behind the scenes. That gets me thinking a little bit about how those reptilian creatures in Lonely Among Us. I wonder if maybe those were a holdover from this episode. That'll be interesting to look at when we get there.
Yeah.
But what's going down in this episode, Captain? So the planet Lygon 2 has a vaccine for a plague that is causing serious harm in the Federation. And so Picard must negotiate for an exchange with a leader who's more interested in ritual kidnapping than political negotiations. Dun dun dun. So there's our setup for this episode. We have to get the vaccine for a plague, but the person we're working with is not the easiest leader to interface and negotiate with of all time. So I'm gonna put this one squarely in an action thriller. Basically, the climax is a one-on-one fight to the death, and technically someone does die. Technically,
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of makes it underwhelming since it's a technical death and not an actual death. But hey, whatever. And what are some tropes that are going? Some big sci-fi tropes that are going down. You got the diabolical plague. The plague that's ravaging everyone. You have a monoracial species. So basically, everyone that we see on the planet, all the natives are black, but I'm not sure if they don't actually discuss that or why or yeah, there's no actual
Nope.
investigation into just what we see. And honestly, I would say that this really hits on some maybe even black exploitation stereotypes about black men, stereotypes about black people, told through the direction of a white production staff. So, yeah, I think this one's got all sorts of historical tropes that are problematic, and we'll
Mm-hmm.
definitely talk about that when we get into the deep cuts. So, yeah, let's take it that way right now and start talking about what works, if anything, from this very problematic episode.
There are two things that work from my perspective for the benefit of the greater franchise. Picard is slowly established as a diplomat instead of a hard-nosed captain. You take a look, especially at Encounter at Farpoint. Picard is very much by the numbers, very much a hard-nosed, hard case kind of guy. Taskmaster, all those sorts of things. Softens maybe a little bit on account of the Psi 2000 virus and Naked Now, but in this episode, Picard is slowly established as a diplomat. There are certain points in which you think, given the precedent of the first two episodes, Picard might lose his cool or Picard might be careless. There's a scene that jumps to mind where Data corrects Picard on the age of the gift, the porcelain gift, which I have words for later on. That you want to talk about budget. There's where the budget went to the dollar store things, but under normal circumstances, given what you know about the character up until that point, Picard could have jumped on Data's case. He doesn't. And the dialogues where he's down on the planet, he emphasizes more diplomacy than aggression, which does benefit his character and does set a foundation for how he handles those strange new worlds that he comes across very often in the show. Another thing that I think works is Yar is fully established as a strong female character. Almost everything about her character is in focus, which I kind of think is odd because, at risk of spoiling a show that's 35 years old almost, Denise Crosby did not feel serviced as an actress and therefore asked for her character to be written off, which does happen later on in the season, but which is kind of ironic because her character is the most defined in the first three episodes. You see why she does what she does, and now in previous episodes, now you see the how. She can hold her own in a fight against pretty much anybody, and that definitely informs her character. Unfortunately, it's maybe that development was premature because they didn't know what to do with her afterwards. Our resident scholar, what works in this episode for you?
Yeah, I want to agree with you on the work that Picard does as a character. I think that's really important. Picard has to see things through a different cultural lens, right? Picard is able to honor the customs on Ligon 2 as unsympathetic as they are, the ritual kidnapping, which we'll get to when we talk about what doesn't work, but he's able to honor the customs of a sovereign planet while saving the life of one of his crew members and saving the life of a member of a planet they just made. Did they just make first contact with this planet, actually? Is this a first contact episode? Did I miss that trope in the
I
beginning?
rewatched this episode right before we filmed. I think maybe second contact. I
Maybe,
think they
yeah.
know, but relations are not formally solidified, as
So,
evidenced by sorry,
no,
as evidenced by the "you shall have no treaty, no vaccine, no YAR" line. I think they're in the process of establishing diplomatic ties, but maybe not first contact.
So yeah, regardless if it's first or second, though, I feel like he does a pretty good job with limited exposure to this planet, with limited knowledge about it. And yeah, they're able to honor Picard's character. And if anything works, it's his attempt to cross those cultural lines while still honoring them. So yeah, I just want to echo that point that you make about Picard and what he has to go through and how his character is defined in this episode. So, yeah, that's a pretty brief list of what works. I think it's time probably now to take a dive into what doesn't work. Um, I know you want to say everything else. So let's just start with that. What is everything else there? Let's talk about that.
So my first reaction of this, and I tried to be witty and quippy, is this episode's only purpose now, especially given our political and cultural climate, is to show at diversity trainings as examples of what might constitute microaggressions. There is something in here to offend just about everybody. Women, people of color, indigenous people, even the French get their lickings in this episode. Data says something to the effect of ancient and primitive French people, and Picard takes offense to that by virtue of the fact that he is a French person, and a British actor playing a French person. Go figure.
Who forgets he's French multiple times. Let's just say it.
Yeah. So with that in mind, also notice Worf isn't present in this episode. That's something to point out. Read into that as deeply as you'd like. So that was my first reaction. The second reaction that I have is this is because I teach psychology and coming at this from a psychological approach. This is a careless use of archetypes. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with that term, an archetype is a behavioral pattern that allows humans to almost instantly size up deeper meanings behind actions and objects, and in this case, characters. I actually sell a product that talks about how archetypes are used in film on my Teachers Pay Teachers store, Monokoi Enterprises. With that in mind, because of the very specific cultures being referenced, it does something else too called priming, which is where you are pairing a deeper message to a stimulus or archetype. And there are so many things being primed here. Sexist things, racist things, and given your notes are bigger than mine on this, I wanted to hand this over to you, our resident scholar, so you can expand on that.
Yeah, let's talk about one of those. And I also want to add that when I was teaching language arts, especially around the Native American mascot issue, we really looked at the effect that harmful stereotypes have. And I'd ask the kids and I'd challenge them, hey, do you think stereotypes actually could kill or physically harm someone? And at the beginning, stereotype. It's just like, just a cliche about someone, right? Nah, we actually looked at a lot of evidence where there is an increased amount of self-harm among indigenous youth who go to a school or are affiliated with an institution with a Native American mascot that's cast as a warrior or in some sort of aggressive light. So no, honestly, I think what's really important to start out with and talk about this episode is that there are some harmful stereotypes in here that really could do harm to people. And I want to go back, and I want to go to the first one, which is pretty much a hypersexualized black male. So basically, I'm thinking that this stereotype goes all the way back to, Birth of a Nation. That really racist film. I can see the scene in my head where there's a young white woman kind of like sitting, minding her own business, and then a male in blackface comes and attacks her. It's a silent film, so there's probably even a title card with some insinuation on there. Haven't seen Birth of a Nation since college. You want to have to watch it in film class. So it's been a minute. I don't really plan on going back and revisiting that one anytime soon either. And then I was also thinking of how this stereotype shows up in politics. I was thinking of that super predator, George H.W. Bush ad, the Willie Horton ad that he played when he was going against Michael Dukakis. Again, just seizing on this stereotype of black men with aggression that want to harm white women or white people. Just pretty diabolical. It's definitely been brought out over and over and over again. And it really does some real harm. When you talked about priming, I'm
Hmm.
sure this, there's some connection between that and audience reactions. I'm sorry, I've kind of lost my train of thought there, but I just feel like there's definitely some connection between those stereotypes, what the audience is getting out, and harm that this can do to folks, especially black men of color. Any thoughts on that, Captain? On other stereotypes that we see, or on that stereotype before we kind of move on to maybe how the premise fails a little bit too?
Well, the just getting deeper into this, there are a lot of things that when you take into account the demographics of the people involved, um, specifically white individuals, Roddenberry, and that other gentleman whose name is Mayberry. There was an accepted level because of the context that you pointed out in the terms of the media. People in that position, from that perspective, played really fast and loose with cultural appropriation. In some cases, it's more perhaps innocent or benevolent. I was thinking about this when I was watching this episode, and as a historian, I had to examine this from this perspective. This episode was made on Paramount around the same time the Eddie Murphy movie Coming to America
Oh,
was being
wow.
filmed. Yes. And I had a theory, but nothing backs this up. So this is a theory and nothing else. Star Trek has a reputation, especially during the original series era, of borrowing costumes and props from other
Oh, yeah.
productions. So my theory was because they cut $3 million from the production budget, they borrowed materials from Coming to America, and that's why the actors happen to be from that demographic. I
Got it.
think I'm wrong
Wow.
on that. But in the broader perspective of things, you have this spectrum in which Hollywood thinks that it's attempting to approach issues of issues pertaining to people of color. So you got Coming to America, which is one of my favorite movies. Beautiful cast, legendary cast, beautiful story, biting social satire. And on the other hand, you have the 1986 movie called Soul Man. Are you familiar with that, Scholar Beta?
I know. Yeah, I know of it. I know of it.
Okay, so with that in mind, you have a person who wants to get into an Ivy League school who happens to be white, and he intentionally changes the pigment of his skin to qualify for basically an historically black college or university adjacent scholarship. So that clearly, and an interesting thing, because we're both sci-fi aficionados, is C. Thomas Howell, who plays the titular character.
Mm.
First choice for Marty McFly. So
Whoa.
yeah.
Nice.
So you have that perspective, you have that era in terms of that concept in terms of Hollywood attempting to do an homage, if you want to do it that way, or whatever. There are some lines in here where they're attempting to say humanity at large has grown past this, so maybe there's good intentions there. But when you take into account that intent versus impact dynamic that we're exploring now, it doesn't
Yeah.
age very well. So that's all I have to say about that. And in terms of the Coming to America Soul Man spectrum, this episode clearly is closer to Soul Man than it is Coming to America.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's go back to that premise for just a second and talk about, where does these kind of stereotypes fit in with this story? So we know that there's a plague going on somewhere in the Federation. We know the Federation needs to come to this planet to get the vaccine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so here's this strange setup already. So on this planet, right? We have men who are in the ruling class, but women are property owners. Because
Hmm.
actually, how this episode it pans out, even though Luton captures Yar, and that's basically acts, 3, 4, and 5, trying to get Yar back. Luton actually does. It's revealed at the very end that this is all just some sort of political machination, so that Luton can have access to the land that his former first wife was in charge of. So it's all just some sort of giant political kind of land ownership coup almost.
Hmm.
It's kind of really convoluted to put that in there. So I guess a couple things I want to say about this is that also involved in this culture where men are the rulers but women are the landowners. There's this planet-wide practice of ritual kidnapping, which I just think is, how do you become a spacefaring civilization when potentially your scientists could get kidnapped, or your engineers could get kidnapped, or your shuttlecraft pilots could be, you know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
I scratch my head a little bit thinking about taking this idea and extrapolating it to a planet-wide culture. That's really interesting to me. So I just have
Yeah.
such a hard time believing this premise. Like, is there no other way for the Federation to acquire this vaccine? Could they not
Hmm.
have done a little more stealth, use some type of duck blind operation like they're going to use in Who Watches the Watchers?
Yeah.
Something to preserve the Prime Directive. And did they not do it? I asked about the first contact, because if this is second contact, did they not know about this sort of, kidnapping practice? Was that not in their first report? I don't know. What do you think about that?
In defense, because I did see those scenes that you were talking about,
Yeah,
the kidnapping tradition, it's implied, especially with the combat, that it's seldom used.
got it. Yeah.
The fight to the death that happens at the end of the episode is seldom used. Um, but I absolutely agree with you. They could have used other stealth approaches. Um, there is, in terms of beta canon, there is a novel called Dark Mirror, which is a next generation era mirror universe book, and they go
Awesome.
about it completely differently than Picard does in here, in this episode. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where there are better ways of doing it. A good friend of mine coined the phrase to me, idiot plot, where the plot could be summarized or resolved very effectively if the characters involved weren't idiots. And this is definitely a contender for idiot plot. Maybe that should be an award in and of itself. So,
Yeah.
with that in mind, yes.
Okay. Yeah. And one last thing on this, and one last thing. I know we can harp on this one for a long time,
Oh
but
yeah.
I just want to point out that this is episode 3. No, technically 4. I'm sorry. And Wesley's flying the ship. So I'm watching Wesley. You know me. I'm watching Wesley in this rewatching retrospective of TNG, and Wesley's flying the ship on episode 4. That by episode 4, I'm just kind of amazed by that. We'll talk more about that when we get to Where No One Has Gone Before.
Yeah.
How much time they're giving Wesley, but wow, I've kind of forgot about that. So yeah, I just want to wrap my comments up by saying, bottom line, I just think there's some lazy writing. The premise is lazy. I think it's some lazy writing. The stereotypes are harmful.
Oh yeah.
The implications of a planet where everyone's the same race, not explored at all, could have been done, could be interesting, but nothing there investigated by the writer. So yeah, just some kind of lazy and kind of some shallow writing going on.
Well, partially, and I need to do a deeper dive on this. There were 30 writers in season one. People,
Whoa.
yes, people were getting hired and fired. There was a higher turnover than a really bad McDonald's. So
Wow. Yes.
yeah, there were literally 30 writers. I did that research over the weekend. So yeah, definitely disjointed. Now, before we beam out here, according to the ship's clock, we got 6 minutes on this before we get beamed out. So, Trek's first and facts. When Star Trek turned 50 years old, the 2016 Star Trek Las Vegas convention I've never been. I'd love to go one of these times, but they had a poll in which attendees ranked the very best and the very worst episodes ever.
Mm.
And Code of Honor ranked second worst out of all the episodes in Star Trek. The first
Yeah.
one was These Are the Voyages, the Enterprise semi-finale.
Hmm.
I think Code of Honor is worse. I get it for devotees of Enterprise how mismanaged that finale was, but at least they didn't. At least it's harmful in the sense of telling a story and not something broader and cultural. That's why, from my perspective, being Hispanic, Latino, Italian, there are many different stereotypes that come up that it's like, yeah, okay, that's not so good. So in my perspective, it's worse. Jonathan Frakes has recently gone on record, I think just over the summer, and refers to this episode as a racist POS.
Yeah.
You can figure out what that acronym means, and reportedly tried to get it pulled from broadcast when it was aired in 1987.
Yeah. Hey, any idea where Shades of Grey ranked on that top 50 or or I
I,
mean, you're ranking all
I,
the best and worst?
I'd have to guess that it was third or fourth because that
Is that
one.
even an episode technically? You know?
Oh, that's good. That is really good.
Yeah, I get maybe someday we get there. Maybe the Captain's Yacht takes us past a tour of that horrible clip show. But
Well,
hey,
okay.
that's for another day, I guess. You know.
We will examine that one in greater detail, and examining that story might take 15 minutes, that episode, because there were very specific things that happened in that episode that made it many different external factors that made that episode what it was. I don't blame that episode. I blame the outside factors that caused that to happen. But I agree, on the surface, it's a cheap clip show. But
Do we got time to talk about awards before we move on? Right?
oh yeah,
Surely.
yeah. So with that in mind, we have the Dollar Tree Award. The Dollar Tree Award is in recognition of something done on the cheap.
Yeah,
And
this is
this
cheap.
makes me
Yeah.
laugh. It is done on the cheap because you see okay, so after the opening credits, you have Data coming in with this porcelain Chinese gift, allegedly.
Yes.
And it's done up with such fanfare, like it's this precious object. And in reality, this horse looks like something that you would get at a farm supply store like Big R or Coastal Farm and Ranch. It doesn't look porcelain. It doesn't look like it comes from the culture they say it does. Oh my gosh, just cheap. Yes.
Yeah, take a look at our Enterprise interior for the episode because that is the conference room,
Mm-hmm.
main conference room behind the bridge. And yeah, there it is where Picard is greeting his the I guess where Luton, sorry, where and company, and there's that really nice horse, yeah, right there in the bottom left. Wow, yeah, that is an amazing gift. I wish I had that, honestly. So yeah, I'm gonna give my award for Enterprise Interior to the main conference room simply because it is the host of the meeting where that crappy horse is exchanged, and I love it. Hey, really quickly with the time I got left, I just want to give a salute to a matte painting as well. Luton's center place. Man, I love that temple-esque design of that building, of that structure, and then the valley. And over there on the right side of the image, you can see some kind of some dwellings over there. I just
Mm-hmm.
think that's a really cool map painting, and I think it worked really nicely
Oh
as
yeah,
well. So just
I
really
agree.
want to give a shout out to that, especially when there is a map painting. Got to give a shout out to it.
You definitely do. We are getting close to beam out. Before we get to our beam out point, real quick, there is a new challenge that I wanted to throw out. It's a variation of the Naked Now plot twist challenge that we talked about. This particular challenge deals with rewriting the whole episode. How would we very quickly take the general, extremely broad plot points of this episode and make our own version of it that is light years less offensive? We don't have the time to do it now, but if there is interest in that, please let us know. Maybe we can make a special episode about it, or if we get to that point, Patreon, and we can make that a Patreon bonus. I have a couple other episodes that could qualify for the ultimate plot twist challenge. So with that in mind, we are 1 minute away from beam out. Scholar Beta, do you have anything before we get beamed out?
You just thinking about this episode, honestly think this is a very important discussion to have, especially with students. I think it's very easy to throw around the word racist in a discussion of art. And I think it's a good exercise, myself as a white teacher, to model discussing what elements are problematic, are harmful, why the work becomes racist, or how a work becomes racist, an inanimate object. I think that's just a fascinating discussion that we don't have in school nearly as much as we should. And I think it's because it could hurt the teachers' feelings sometimes because the work they're bringing forward. It could hurt the students' feelings sometimes because maybe they're a big fan of the franchise or the work that we're looking at. So it's a difficult conversation to have, but an incredibly important one and a nuanced one. And Catherine, I'm glad we could have this discussion. By no means did we solve, racism in Star Trek, but I think this is a good discussion, or a good beginning of a discussion on some of the problematic aspects in one of our favorite shows. It's okay for us to love this thing and remain critical of it at the same time. I think that's something we really have to model.
Definitely.
Any final words from you, my friend?
I think so, and we're about ready for beam out. And there we go.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, I had to pause it a little bit because you were on a roll at the end, but we're only 10, 15 seconds over, so pretty good.
I think we're ready. You want to get us started on episode 5 here?
Oh, yes. Give me 1 second. I will reset the transporter, so to speak, and we will go from there. So we are taking a look now at the Last Outpost. Ready to engaging now. So with that in mind, episode 5, The Last Outpost, stardate 41386.4. This one actually breaks the code a little bit. There's a theory out there that the production release and the actual chronological order of the episodes are out of sequence. This definitely qualifies as one of them. So, little bit of behind the scenes here. This was an episode that was, shall we say, enhanced to channel Picard's diplomacy by Leonard Maislish, who was Gene Roddenberry's personal lawyer. Now, you might remember me talking about how Picard, goodness sakes, Gene Roddenberry originally did not want to do a new Star Trek, and he ultimately changed his mind. Well, Leonard Maislish is somebody responsible for that. Maislish was able to negotiate with Paramount and get a compensation package, which was, in the words of John Pike, the Paramount president, sufficient for Maislish and Roddenberry. So there you go. Money cured that problem. But when Maislish stayed on for the first couple seasons with Roddenberry, representing Roddenberry, he tinkered with a lot of episodes. He broke into people's writers' offices. This might be one of the reasons why they went through 30 writers in the first season. He went through their desks. He went through their computers. DC Fontana caught him once, and she said when she found him, he almost jumped 10 feet.
Dang.
Yeah. And Maislish was famous for going through and creating quote-unquote notes from Roddenberry that he said were from Roddenberry but were really from him, so he could have control over the show. And this is one of those episodes. It got to the point where this episode actually resulted in a minor feud with the Writers Guild of America, because unlike Roddenberry, Maislish as a lawyer was not a WGA member, and therefore a grievance was filed. So that's the little behind-the-scenes story here. So, Scholar Beta, take it away. What's the premise and trope here?
So, what's the design of this episode? So in this one, we have the Enterprise faces the Ferengi for the first time, chasing them following the theft of an energy converter. Little does Picard know both vessels are traveling amongst the ruins of a fallen empire whose defense system may still be functioning. So, when I'm thinking about the genre and tropes for this one, this is classic Trek, space anomaly. We're going through space, and all of a sudden, something happens to us. In this case, they are kind of captured in the tractor beam of a planetary outpost. In other, it could be a natural space phenomenon, but this is just classic Trek. Star Trek or Starship Enterprise moving forward when boom, insert episode. So some other minor tropes. I guess this is technically, I put another question mark on this. This is technically a first contact with with the Ferengi, but technically, because in the battle we're going to learn that there already was some contact between the Federation and the Ferengi, but we'll get there when we talk about the battle. This is also an instance of solve the riddle, solve the episode. There's going to be a kind of a puzzle riddle that Riker has to solve by just standing still in Act 4. And yeah, once he figures that out, the episode's over, basically. And Act 5 is just kind of padding to round out the episode. And then, honestly, one of my favorite tropes, I really love the Lost or Fallen Empire that has the super technology, like what we're going to see in the Takan Empire in this episode. I just think that's really a cool idea. Yeah, we'll talk about that a little more when we talk about what works. So there's our classic Trek premise. We're going through space when we encounter what happens in the rest of the episode. In this case, a fallen empire and also a new foe, the Ferengi. So, Captain, what's on your mind about this episode?
So you had said that first contact might be questionable in the case of the Ferengi, and there's definitely something to be said about that. But first contact definitely happens with the Takan Empire,
for
if I'm
sure.
not
Yes.
mistaken. So it's either way, it's still a first contact episode. So with that in mind, should we get into deep cuts?
Yeah, and I like your first take too. Thinking about the episode arena. So let's jump into that.
So yeah, the thing that when I was watching this episode, I got the impression that this was a redress of the arena script, the arena plot. For those of you who might need a refresher, in the original series episode, Arena, Kirk goes to Cestus 3 in a Federation colony. It's been blown up. The Gorn come in, blow it up some more. The Gorn leave. The Federation Starship Enterprise chases it. Then they effectively get the equivalent of a space flat tire because a superior civilization, a technologically superior civilization, comes in and cuts out their energy. And then members of both factions have to figure out a way to resolve the problem. Originally, you think it's through combat. Then Kirk gets wise in the original series episode, and the plot is resolved amicably. Or reasonably amicably. Same thing happens here. The Enterprise D is chasing a Ferengi vessel that has perhaps attacked / stolen Federation technology.
Yep.
They're going full bore. They're about ready to overtake them. But then you get some plot twists that completely conceal the fact that this is an arena-style redux. So they get snared. You think that it's the Ferengi that have the superior technology, but then plot twist, it's not. It comes from the planet. And then got several different kinds of plot twists here. So Ferengi, Riker, Worf, Data, and Geordi beam them to the planet. And then plot twists, they're all scattered all over the planet. All these sorts of different things. It's a very effective way at twisting the plot and making the story flow in a way where you're not sure where it's going. Some episodes of Star Trek, The Next Generation, not many of them, but some are, you know what's coming a mile away. And you think you can think through the episode, and in many cases you can. This one, it's twisted, and it's twisted, and it's twisted, but the foundation of which is a very familiar episode. So that's my perspective on that. So Scholar Beta, take it away.
Yeah, and I First of all, awesome catch on the arena. Arena's like probably in my top 10 favorite TOS episodes. And so excellent catch on seeing the parallels between this and arena. I hadn't thought about that at all when watching this. Um, I really do like the early reversal. I think that works in this. And I cannot remember, my notes are lacking here, if Picard mentions in this episode or in one that's coming up that he is frustrated by some of the glitches that he is noticing on this Galaxy class starship. Because at first he thinks this is another glitch, where they're slowing down here and something has caused them to not for their ship to be like not incapacitated, but like you said, flat tire. So I kind of want to look into that. But then again, yeah, you get this situation where you think, oh, Picard's going to have to surrender again, just like he did with Q. But nope, twist. You're absolutely right. The Ferengi then get on the intercom and they surrender. And before Picard does. And so, yeah, that kind of sets up, oh, that's interesting. Now I wonder what's actually going on. That basically brings us to the larger plot with the Takan Empire. Also, I want to just go back and just really say that about the Takan Empire, I'm really dig this fallen empire, vanished empire trope. I really think it's fascinating that to ponder the idea of a long fallen super empire like the Takan, especially when we think about the Federation. Like we kind of think of the Federation as just kind of like untouchable super empire that will never fail. Yeah, it's interesting to know that there are other great empires, star spanning empires that came before the Federation, and they've gone. And it's because of something like their star going nova. So it's not even like they were defeated by like a superior enemy or something like that.
Yeah,
Exactly. It's just exactly. So I think that's fascinating to ponder. I wish there was like a mirror episode or a future episode where Picard could have gone back and seen the Federation fallen or something like that. But maybe we get that in another show. But yeah, what do you think about that?
You mentioned another show. Allegedly, I don't know this because I canceled CBS All Access in favor of HBO Max. I had to
We're not
make that.
endorsed by either of these.
Yeah, we are not endorsed by either of these. Supposedly, what you're describing there with the Federation is the arc for season 3 of Discovery.
Oh, look at me making some.
Yeah.
Okay, cool, nice.
So
I didn't think there needs to be an entire season, but one episode. But okay, I'll take a season.
yeah, the
We'll see.
Federation supposedly, as described by the promotional materials, the galaxy takes a left turn in the 32nd century or something, and that's what happens there. So,
Wow.
Do make of that what you'd like, dear scholar, and we can go from there. So,
Yeah.
did you have any
data in the Chinese finger trap? Is that okay?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So let's talk about some things I think that don't work. I think the Chinese finger trap is very dumb foreshadowing. I know that's not like if a student said that in class, I'd kind of say go ahead and say more. But okay, so we have the scene where Data is in the conference room and he cannot get unstuck from having both of his index fingers in this Chinese finger trap. Do you remember that thing that fooled you when you were in first grade or second grade and you didn't have the brain of a supercomputer with the sum of human knowledge, in your back pocket? You remember that? I just think, okay, I get what they're doing. They're trying to give him that fish out of water, human experience. He doesn't know how to solve this child's puzzle, but he also has the sum of human knowledge. You think you just have a Wikipedia article with a diagram on how to push your fingers together. But okay. Oops, sorry. I'm getting a little carried away with this. But yeah, it works on one level to foreshadow that Riker is going to have a puzzle that he must solve later. Okay, I get that. I understand why you put that in there. But if you're going to foreshadow something like that, man, couldn't we have got that like three-dimensional chess that we get a little later or something like that? I don't know. I just think that's kind of a weak attempt at foreshadowing there. Yeah, what do you think about that, Captain?
I may interject, dear scholar. What's going on here? The thing that I love about Data and what Data has how Data has impacted me on the spectrum growing up is you can have higher reasoning capacity, but when it comes to physical acuity, you you struggle. And that's why Data struggling with the Chinese finger trap does not speak to me the same way it speaks to you, because in terms of physical acuity, balance, this is one of the reasons why I didn't do sports growing up, because having that ability to work your limbs and stuff like that in such a way where you go, okay, you got to do this and then you got to move that to get your fingers out of the trap, that is lost on somebody like me because of, all those different variables that you have to do with your limbs. So with that in mind, that didn't really bother me, but
Nice.
I found a connection with Data in that regard, because you're in a situation where you put yourself in a spot physically and you don't know how to get out of it. I remember once there was a little in daycare, there was a little Tykes sort of play set, and I got my head stuck in one of those holes that you stick your head out of. I had a really big head growing up. And it happens. But I see that is a legitimate critique when you take into account that Data having this encyclopedic knowledge of human interaction and stuff like that, you think he'd be able to do that. But considering the subtext to his character, at least for me, is how a person on the spectrum handles the outside world. That character speaks to me in that way more than others. So
I love that idea, and I really love that perspective that you brought in too. And we know that Data can sort of be it's not what's the word I'm looking for? He can struggle with other, kind of somewhat obvious tasks, and we'll I'm sure point those out as we get there. What's interesting too, as you talked about, like, the physical part might be separate from like the mental understanding of it. What's really interesting is that it is not a physical puzzle that Riker's going to have to overcome. It's definitely more of a mental one, so it's sort of like the reverse of the finger trap that you get in the beginning. That one's more like dexterity based, and then you're just going to have to use your mind to solve it. So maybe actually that was the point the entire time, and I didn't realize that. I don't know. But hey, awesome perspective. I really appreciate you bringing that up.
I'm glad.
Okay, let's start talking about the Ferengi. You good with that?
Oh, yeah.
Because what doesn't work for me is basically everything about the Ferengi in this episode. Their mannerisms, their goofy power whip. This goes down as such a bad intro for them, and it's basically going to sideline them. They're going to attempt to use the Ferengi a few more times, but it's going to take such a hit that group is going to take such a hit that they're going to be completely replaced by the Borg and overshadowed, because we know they're supposed to be the big bad, or one of the big bads of this. I think the concept of the hyper-capitalist is interesting, and it's going to be built upon even more. Like they're not going to lose track of that idea. It's going to come up in the battle here pretty soon. But here's what I'm going to say about the Ferengi. Even though they had a terrible introduction in this episode, they're like goblin capitalists, however you want to describe them. Other writers are going to nail them and figure out how to use them significantly better. And that's going to, I've been watching some Deep Space Nine recently. Quark, Rom, Nog, the rules of acquisition. Other writers are going to figure out how to use these kind of satirical, hyper-capitalist goblin creatures to a much greater effect. But these writers who introduced him, I don't think they had a clue what they were doing, to be perfectly honest. What's your take on that, friend?
So with that in mind, I call the Ferengi, as we can see in our script, the failed heir of the heir to the Klingons.
Yeah.
Because you can definitely tell that at the beginning. They try to imply that the Ferengi are the new Klingons. And the discussion point that I suggested for this part of the episode is, why did the Ferengi fail but the Borg succeed? And thematically, both of them are attempting to be mirrors or polar opposites to the Federation. They don't make a big deal of it in this episode, but later on, money is not an issue. Definitely in First Contact, it's established. One of my favorite lines of Star Trek: the acquisition of wealth is no longer the driving force of our lives. We work to better ourselves and the best of humanity and the rest of humanity. So with that in mind, you could do how do you create a polar opposite to that? Just like with the original series, the polar opposite of the Federation was freedom is what the Federation stood for, multiculturalism, those sorts of things, and you juxtapose that with the Klingons, which are the exact polar opposite:
Yeah.
subjugation, conquest, dissension. Cracking down on dissension. That's the Klingons. That's why that concept works. The Federation and Klingon and Ferengi attempted to do that using the Klingon model.
Yeah.
Money's not an issue. We seek to improve ourselves. Well, the Ferengi try to buy you out, and they are Yankee traders. I love that phrase. They keep bringing that up. Yankee traders, Yankee traders, Yankee traders, aka pirates, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
The thing that works with the Borg, two reasons that I think the Borg work and the Ferengi don't. In the political and cultural context of the United States, taking into account this is the late 1980s, early 1990s.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Capitalism is better than communism, for better or worse. The Soviet Union is collapsing. It'll be gone by the early 90s. So from an audience perspective, that doesn't work. The Borg work because the Borg are basically an extreme version of the Federation in the sense that we seek to improve ourselves. That's the Borg's expression for everything. The over-reliance on technology to an absurd degree. The lack of the multiculturalism becoming the point of monoculturalism, where every redeemable quality of somebody who's assimilated becomes part of the whole, and that becomes part of the dominant culture. That's why I think the Borg work and the Ferengi don't. On top of that, that's the core of it, because on top of that, you got really weird stage direction where they're like, so Quark is in this episode, the actor who plays Quark.
Yes.
Armin
Not
Timmerman.
Quark himself, but yes, the actor is absolutely
not Quark himself. And he talked about his direction being hyperactive hyena or something to that effect. So they got really bad stage direction. They were trying to play up the uncivilized, I put that in really big quotes, the uncivilized aspect of the Ferengi, again, trying to juxtapose them to the Federation. Didn't work. So that's why I'm thinking, yes, Scholar Beta.
No, I'm great analysis. You're right. When you think about when this was made, you kind of have the Ferengi as hyper capitalists, and then you have the Borg as forced conformity to a dystopian level. And what's more terrifying to Americans? Definitely forced conformity to a dystopian level. That's way more terrifying to an American audience, I think, than hypercapitalism, even though hypercapitalism is terrifying and takes the humanity away from people and forces them to conform into workers, etc. We could get into that, of course. The capitalism is too abstract for this particular enemy. It's just too much of an abstraction. And we know the Ferengi culture, they're going to add more about like how they treat women. And that's why I kind of called them satire. We never are going to see the world from their perspective, even though we're going to have amazing characters like Quark and Rom. We're never going to see them on Ferenginar interacting with women in that culture and trying to justify that and make that, a part of Star Trek. It's just never going to happen. It's almost written because they're written to an absurd level. Right. Whereas, I guess we don't necessarily get that from the Borg either, but we do actually kind of start seeing some Borg humanity later, like we see some Ferengi humanity later. So both are redeemable, even though they're both sort of they're both pretty equally terrifying in my book.
Well, and you would say forced conformity. I would say pure communist in terms of describing the Borg.
Sure.
And that's what my background when I was in graduate school was, the relationship between the United States and Latin America during the Cold War. And I love the Cold War era because it's basically all of Star Trek in a nutshell. You got the Klingons on one end, and then you got the Borg on the other end, and the actions done by communist states in terms of aggression fit into one of those two categories. That's why I absolutely love that era in history. And before I became a teacher, my goal was to work for the State Department as an analyst, specializing in that. the
Mm.
relationships. I'm glad I dodged that. I'm glad I'm talking Star Trek with you right now, dear scholar.
Yeah, thank
Than
you.
than trying to navigate this current political mess. So, with that in mind, um, yeah, do you have any other things that don't quite work in this episode, Scholar
Yeah.
Beta?
Since we got just a second, I am going to mention that the guardian of the Takan Empire, who eventually tests Riker to see if Riker will strike back and fight and then therefore be destroyed, or if Riker will stand his ground and be stoic and without a fight and therefore succeed in the riddle. That's the riddle I was telling you about earlier. That character's name is Portal 63, which is a interesting name to say the least. I'm just going to say I really don't like his puffy prosthetic makeup. And I think it is the spiritual progenitor to the Traveler's puffy hands, which we'll talk about in a little while, which I
Oh
also
yeah,
don't like. So I'm
oh,
just, I'm just, I don't know what it is. It's like, get that man a topical, let's help this guy out a little bit. You know what I'm saying?
oh
I
yeah.
just feel for him. But of course, I don't think it's actually a person. I think it's some sort of computer projection. So it's a computer. Am I right? Portal
I
63 or an entity of some sort, you think? I don't know.
he
Did
might
he
be.
choose to have a puffy face? Maybe.
To diplomatically give the writers the benefit of the doubt, I was under the impression that maybe he's one part computer program in terms of the projection, but
Mm.
then the portal entity itself was an organic life form that was in cryogenic freeze or suspended animation. That's the vibe that I got from it because yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, we'll never know until we see the web exclusive series Star Trek Fall of Takan. CBS All Access 2030. Hire us. We'll write that for you. We got
We
you.
will write
We'll
it.
take
We
care
will
of you.
write it.
All right,
Love it.
let's get into our first and facts. How about when are we beaming out? We got just a little bit more time in this episode.
Oh, we got some time. We got 5 minutes. So
Okay, cool. Yeah, let's
with
hit some of these up.
so this is the birth of a new gimmick. There is a literal supercut out there. There are many
Oh yeah.
supercuts out there which talk about Worf coming up with an idea that is aggressive, and some character who is his superior cuts him down. And that happens here. Um, yeah, you just he's like, well, we should be aggressive towards the Ferengi. No,
No.
no, we won't do that. So
Yeah.
that's kind of an interesting thing to see. It's the birth of a gimmick. It starts in this episode. Another thing, there's a few instances where they try. We got confused, or I got confused. Spectrum stuff where I said Picard was British and French at the same time. This is an episode where they attempt to really play up the French part. He says merde, which
Yes.
if you
Yep.
speak French, you know what that means. If you don't speak French, it's one of George Carlin's words you can't say on television.
Absolutely.
And they sidestep that. And I actually use that when I was rewriting my episodes of Picard. I use that precedent as an example to throw in some interesting phrases
Oh yeah.
from Mexican slang and Hawaiian slang and stuff like that, where it's like, well, okay, because I want to keep this friendly for an audience, because that's my biggest gripe with Picard is it's not for friendly, or one of them anyway. So we're going to take a sidestep and we're going to throw in something in another language, and it's going to skip the censor. So, but that attempts to build up Picard's French heritage. We mentioned Quark
Yep.
already. The original actor, the actor who played Quark, is in this episode. He's just not Quark. And have you noticed that they attempted to use holographic emitters in this episode?
As a matter of fact, I did, and that is my Enterprise interior for this episode. We're still in the conference room. We haven't left it. We're just now going to pay very close attention to the conference table, which has a three-dimensional display, or a holographic emitter, as you discussed. Take a look at those screen caps that I got. First of all, they capture it in the Takan language, and then Data, while he's working on he's about to get stuck in the Chinese finger trap. Data is able to translate that to English. Or basic or common. What do they call it in Trek? Oh man, this is a huge
Uh,
tell
i-
for me.
in the written version, they call it Federation Lingua Franca.
Wow, I
Yeah,
did it. I'm glad I. Okay, I didn't know that. I didn't.
that's what Alan Dean
It's
Foster
common in D
called.
and D. Yeah,
Yeah, so
exactly, exactly.
the
So, anyways, we have it in this the Federation language. I love this three-dimensional display, but I'm sad it goes away. I really like it. I think it looks fine. I got no
I'm not,
problem with it at all.
because it cut into the budget probably. That's where the money went, and that's why you have things like what happened in Code of Honor and something that happens in this episode for which there is an award that I want that has aggravated me to no end. So should we do awards, Mr. Scholar? Or
Yeah, if you got just a second, throw it out there. I'm fine with that. We might get
so
beamed up, but go for it.
yeah. So with that in mind, let's see how long we have. Okay, we got 90 minutes and 90 seconds. So real quick, Dollar Tree Award. This gets another Dollar Tree award. The thing that has gnawed me about season one episodes is, with the exception of the Romulan warbird at the end, alien spacecrafts, when you look at their bridges, it's minimalist as all get out.
Oh yeah.
And the thing that has always gnawed at me about this episode and future episodes beyond this is you do not see the interior of a Ferengi bridge. Yes, Scholar Beta.
No, go ahead. I have a theory on why, and I think it's because it's the battle bridge was the set that is what they were going to use, for enemy star vessels, and they dressed it as the battle bridge in season one because they use it a couple times. We're going to see it in Arsenal, Freedom, and in the battle here pretty soon. That's my theory, at least.
That's a good approach, but it's not exclusive to just the Ferengi, the Klingon vessel.
Oh yeah.
You just see a backdrop where on one side it's the Federation logo, on the other side it's the Klingon logo, and that's the bridge. And their budget goes up from them because in season 2 you got a proper Klingon bridge afterwards. But that's something that has frustrated me about season 1, and the Ferengi bridge is the worst offender in my opinion. So
Absolutely. That horrible white background that they made him float on, the Damon float on. Yeah, they could have come up with something a little better, I feel like, for that. But
you would think. Yep, there you go. Well, we're 15 seconds short this time, so we finally broke even. Don't need to get beamed out there unless you have something, Mr. Scholar, to add to this.
No, I think I'm ready to move on to episode 6 when you are.
All right, let me reset the transporter real quick, so to speak. And we will go from there. All right. So, where no one has gone before. This is stardate 41263.1. Again, kind of out of order there. That plays into this theory that they showed these episodes, and you can do that with a show like this because it's not long form storytelling. Little behind the scenes stuff here. This episode was written by TOS pocket novel author Diane Duane. Growing up, I read a lot of her work growing up.
Dang, nice.
Yeah. In the early drafts of the script, there was no Traveler.
Ooh.
Yeah. Maurice
That's
Hurley.
huge.
Yeah, that is huge. So that's a good ad. There are so many things about this episode which I think it would have benefited more if they stayed in the early drafts, stuck to the early drafts. But the Traveler not being there is definitely a glaring omission, and I'm glad he's there. The arrival of the Enterprise in the higher dimension was made possible by a fluke made by Kaczynski, the Tony Stark-esque character, but without the charm. I got a lot of Tony Stark vibes from him, except he's not charismatic and he's grating. Picard and Crusher were supposed to be visited by Jack Crusher in this realm.
Oh.
Yeah. And the Enterprise was supposed to materialize in the yolk of a cosmological egg, as the script says. I would say it's a singularity, because when they go out of the singularity and finally create the equation to get them back to normal space, they create a new universe. So, yes, Scholar Beta.
I wish Picard and Crusher had been visited by Jack. Wow, that would have been insanely interesting. We are going to get some Jack Crusher. We will, but not to season 4 or 5, somewhere in there.
Yeah, something like that.
In the episode Violations. Dang, that would have been
Yeah, as
interesting.
I
Okay,
said,
I'm
a lot
sorry
of
to
things.
interrupt. I just think that's
No, no,
fascinating.
no. I'm glad you think it's great because, um, as I said, I think as good as this episode is, I think it would have benefited a lot more if they stuck to the earlier drafts. For example, that and the ultimate resolution of the script where they try to inverse the formula that got them there, and in so doing, they create a new universe. And when they return to normal space time, they discover that this entire excursion lasted 6 days, and they arrived on the seventh. And following, as they call, biblical observance in the script, Picard ordered a day of rest because they're basically gods. They created a
Yeah.
new universe.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
But that definitely, and that is all scrapped in what we actually get. We're
Oh yeah.
instead of creating a new verse, we're just really a long ways from home. We'll get there when we talk about the premise here in just a second. But honestly, two things that really, two sad losses. I'm glad they included the Traveler, but the whole No Jack Crusher materializing, that could have been really terrifying and amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole creating their own pocket universe, who knows? That could have had implications down the line too. That'd been fascinating. Okay, so let's
Yeah.
talk a little bit what actually happens. What ended up going down when the final draft got into the hands of the directors? Well, in this episode, where no one has gone before, the Enterprise D hosts propulsion specialist Kaczynski, no first name, whose breakthrough developments in starship propulsion appear to be complete rubbish. During tests of this propulsion system or propulsion equation, whatever it is, it's not like a new piece of equipment brought on board. The Enterprise is thrown 2.7 million light years away from Earth, or away from its, I guess, original heading, into galaxy M33. And then when they attempt a second propulsion test, they are then thrown 1 billion light years away. Whereas Data says, where none have gone before. So again, when I think about this episode, I think this is another classic Trek episode. Instead of a space anomaly, we have an experiment gone wrong. This is going to happen a ton in Star Trek. In season 3, episode 1, Wesley's going to give sentience to a bunch of nanites that are going to take over and infect the Enterprise. Beverly's going to get caught in some sort of time distortion, which is an experiment gone wrong. This happens all the time, so I'm going to just file this under a classic Trek experiment gone wrong genre. Some tropes we're working with. We have our first inclusion of a Starfleet jerk. Oh, we're going to get a ton of them in TNG, but we get some Starfleet jerks. I recall what you were saying about how Roddenberry thought it was more important to have a counselor than an engineer. I think it's very obvious why. We have a bunch of giant egos in Star Trek who need some counseling, you know? We're also going to get a couple tropes. Your mind makes it real. Straight out of the Matrix. We are also going to get the chosen one, I'm saying. I'm going to talk about Wesley here in a little bit. And also something TV tropes calls angel unaware. You know, we don't realize the Traveler is kind of this superhuman alien creature. It's, you know, kind of an angel among us, but we just don't know about it. And then our final trope is just simply a long ways from home. A billion light years is a very long ways from home.
Oh
So
yeah.
that's kind of the type of science fiction we're looking at for this particular episode. But let's talk about what works. Can I get us started off with that really
Go ahead.
fast? Okay, I'm gonna say so far this is probably my favorite episode we've seen so far. You know, I maybe say Encounter at Farpoint was, you know, last time we talked, but I think this one really does a couple things well for me. One, I love the special effects; they're very reminiscent of 2001: Space Odyssey, which it has a huge place in my heart. I just think that it just works. It just plays on that. It just plays on that really nicely. I also think the dynamic, even though we can talk that Kaczynski, he kind of sucks. The dynamic between him and the Traveler reveals that pride and ego are very much alive in Starfleet, and that
Oh
this
yeah.
Starfleet specialist would plagiarize warp systems theory, you know, in order to advance his career, which is really interesting. Kaczynski wants the fame. You know, this is what Maddox and Measure of a Man and other people are going to be susceptible to as well in future episodes. And then last thing I think that's really fascinating about this, kind of some world building, Kaczynski says when they're thrown 2.7 million light years off course, he says, in 3 centuries of space travel, we've charted just 11% of our galaxy. And then we accomplished this. So I think it's fascinating that, like, yeah, even though, you know, TNG, you know, 24th century.
24th
Um,
century.
Even though we're in the 24th century, we've only charted 11% of our galaxy. I think that's fascinating. It makes sense then that there's a crew out there on a starship just going forward, trying to encounter and document and be diplomatic with new civilizations. So I don't know. I like this episode, and I like the premise and some of the world building we get from it. You've got some notes on character, because we definitely get a lot of good stuff about character. Let's talk about that for a little bit. What do you think about some character study?
I definitely agree with the world building, and also I'd second that with character building, because you have a lot of stuff here. You have Picard. Again, the common theme, it seems, since Encounter at Farpoint is to soften Picard and make him more likable and make him more personable. And this episode is the best example of that, because he suddenly sees a projection of his mother, or some sort of manifestation of his mother. He almost cries at one point, suggesting that, I don't know, I got a vibe that something tragic might have happened to his mother, because they kind of play the character arcs that are established here. I think they were a good start, but I think they abandoned them as they established other characters. Case in point, when you see Worf, Worf is smiling. He's talking affectionately about his little pet Targ, which apparently, I got this from the set script notes. The Targ was smelly. People hated having the Targ on the set, but he's happy. And considering later the fact that his tragic backstory is established, I don't know which way they went with that, but
was the Targ on Kittimer? Does it matter? Do we know? Will we ever know? Yeah.
Well, and by the time Yar passes away, she mentions that Worf is an orphan. Yeah, I don't know. It's a good touch, considering you don't see very much Worf in these first couple episodes. It's a good character moment to have him sit there with his Targ. That's the most Trekkie thing I think I've said this whole weekend. But is a Klingon and his Targ, a boy and his dog.
Targ. Exactly.
Yep,
exactly.
A Klingon and his Targ. Riker, his bond with Wesley gets stronger. He owns up to his mistake of ignoring Wesley. Wesley shows off his technical aptitude in a way that shows up Kaczynski, shows kindness to the Traveler, boosts his emotional intelligence to match his raw intelligence. Because a common criticism of Wesley Crusher is that he's a know-it-all, and giving him that emotional intelligence to match the raw intelligence was nice. You have the softer side of Yar. You see her with her childhood pet, little kitty cat. And you got that. And those are the things that I think work really, really well. It's the strongest character study. It expands more and exceeds better than Where Naked Now did in terms of examining character, I think. So
yeah, I'll definitely second your thought on Patrick Stewart's acting and Picard's interaction with his mother. There's actually a really great moment where he's talking to Mom, and Riker comes up and interrupts them, and he puts his hand up. He's like, "No, now, number one," and it really makes it seem like, oh, I just have another moment with my mom left, and don't interrupt this. And you're right, the sort of the tone there that I'm getting is, maybe something tragic, or maybe he didn't get to spend enough time with his mom, or he never had a relationship, and maybe now he is sad about that. I don't know, but you're right. Patrick Stewart's acting, and a lot of folks acting, not just Patty Stewart's, but a lot of folks acting in this series is awesome, and just that little moment right there is really incredible. Okay, I didn't know if I should put this under what works or what doesn't, so I'll just mention it now as sort of the transition to what doesn't work. But okay, so basically we're establishing for canon in this episode that thought can now bend and manipulate time and space. And that when Wesley understands this, the Traveler cautions him and tells him that knowledge is dangerous, with the implication that humans are not ready for certain technology or powers, right? And moreover, then the Traveler tells Picard in sickbay to not interfere with Wesley's development, which I think is really fascinating. So this is kind of like thematically similar to a prime directive. Picard cannot
Hmm.
interfere in Wesley's development as a sort of superhuman or potentially super powerful being. I don't know. I think that's really interesting. I'm not sure if that works or doesn't, but yeah, let us transition to Kaczynski now. And what doesn't work is we'll talk about Kaczynski and the Traveler a little bit more over here. So, Captain, what do you think? What are your thoughts about Kaczynski and him not
I
working?
I think he's absolutely insufferable. I think the writers are going for the person that understands machines better than people, and
Yes.
that kind of archetype, going back to what I said earlier about archetypes, it can work pretty well. I'm pretty sure you and I know some people who definitely fit that archetype,
Sure.
where they
Yeah. Yeah.
understand people better than machines better than people.
Oh yeah.
But he's well, I put the phrase he's a total putz. He undercuts everybody. As I said before, he's basically Tony Stark, but without the charisma and charm, because you
Yeah.
can see a similar thing being said by Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark. The lines are very similar. And I was wondering about that while I was watching this. I was like, how could Tony Stark say this and it's effective and it's endearing, but Kaczynski says it and it's not. And I think maybe it's improper direction. But I do agree with him with the whole thought being the foundation of reality monologue and how he kind of undercuts that, because the whole thesis of Star Trek, especially with Gene Roddenberry, is science and technology solve our problems. And it's all about the empirical, it's all about the concrete. Intuitive stuff can come in where appropriate, but it's all about the empirical. And the thing I
Yeah.
don't like, in addition to Kaczynski, is it gets kind of use the force sort
Yeah.
of mentality, very new age, very kind of hippy dippy at the end of this episode, which is a major
Yes.
letdown, which is why I think they would have benefited a lot more with the create a formula, invert the formula, see if it works, and create a new pocket reality. I like that plot resolution better than Picard effectively saying, send thoughts and prayers to the traveler. Because
Yeah.
that's
Exactly.
essentially what he says at the end.
Exactly, exactly. All right, I'll need everyone to think positive thoughts for the travel. Okay, so here's my thing. Here's my thing. Did they really think out this whole time thought reality thing at all? Because these opening energies episodes pour so much energy, as I talked about at the top of this episode, into developing Wesley, right? So like Wesley already has a field promotion to acting ensign, right? And now he is some sort of Mozart prodigal figure whose mind is able to shape reality, right? Okay, so far in TNG, that's what Wesley gets. Okay, so far in TNG, Data is a supercomputer fish out of water. Okay, that's what he gets. And so far in TNG, Picard wins with speeches, right? But Wesley is prophesized to be as almost powerful as a Q by episode. What are we on 5 now? It's just it's 6. I mean, this is just insane to me. Wes could have ended the entire Dominion War, resettled the Baku, traveled to the Borg homeworld and destroyed the Queen, and brought Voyager back home with his powers. I'm just saying he could have
Yep.
done all of those things. So I don't know. It seems like, kind of those things we do as when we were kids and we're playing make believe and we introduce something that's way too powerful into the make believe story. And
Mm-hmm.
now it kind of broke it a little bit. So that's kind of something I'm critical of. And it's not like the Traveler's going to be in every episode or anything. What Traveler makes maybe like 2 more appearances in the show. I
At
want to
least a
say,
couple. Yeah,
yeah, at
at
least a
least
couple
two.
more. So,
And you
yeah.
mentioned the Traveler. There is a connection between the actor who played the Traveler and Modern Time right now. I mean, not
Oh,
Modern
interesting.
Time
Yeah.
right now. The scripts. Sorry. You and I talked about this earlier.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, what is the connection between the Traveler and the cast? The actor who played the Traveler.
Yeah, so what I found out was that the Traveler actually auditioned to play Data. I can't remember the actor's name. Don't have it in my notes right now. But obviously, that went to Brett Spiner, and who does an amazing job. Yeah, I'm grateful for that casting decision. Not that the Traveler does a bad job or anything like that, but Spiner's just pretty masterful at it. I can't imagine him any other way.
Oh yeah.
And also, I'll just say one last thing about the Traveler. Yeah, they're doing the whole ridge prosthetic on his face thing, raising the brows, and then they're giving him the puffy hand gloves. Those puffy hand gloves are going to come back like 2 or 3 times. Riker is going to wear them in the episode First Contact. I just
Yep.
hate those puffy hand gloves. I hate them. I just don't like him at all. Like I said, get this man a topical. I just feel like you're going to be yelling that at the Star Trek screen a whole bunch, sometimes. But yeah, not a fan of you're right. The force aspect and using my mind to manipulate space travel. That does not seem very empirical. And yeah, I just think it opens up a huge can of worms. That if we thought about it for even 5 minutes, there would be no Star Trek franchise. Because all of our problems could be solved by like thinking a different reality and therefore changing it. So yeah. But still, nevertheless, besides that small gigantic thing, I still think this is one of my favorite episodes we've seen so far.
Oh, but no argument here on that. I just to make it an immortally classic episode. I think if they had stuck with the empirical more than the philosophical, I think it would work really well. And it's one of those things where it's like, oh, a thought can solve everything. Okay, well, there's a few problems I can think of right now, which if you
Exactly.
thought really hard, I don't know. I'd like to travel some more. I
Exactly.
can't currently do that right now. So I kind of thought that was a little precious and a little, and I'm glad we agree with that, Scholar Beta. So with that in mind, I think I got some facts and awards, and then we can wrap up this episode. So
Let's do it.
yeah, let's do it. Trek first and facts. It's another episode and another chief engineer. We
Yep.
had a character in Naked Now who was the chief engineer. I said her name last episode. Her name was so forgettable. I can't
I
consciously
can't remember it
recall it
either.
right now. You have this guy, Lieutenant Commander Argyle, aka the fat guy with the beard who assembles lore. You're going to see this is his first episode.
Oh yeah.
Yep, that's his first appearance. In terms of Trek facts, that seems to be definitely noteworthy. In case you're ever at a Star Trek trivia night and they ask about the first 3 engineers on the Enterprise D, you have Blonde Lady, who I might go through the script real quick while you talk about your salute to matte paintings and pull up her name because it's hurting me that I can't remember that right now. Maybe it's stage fright. And then Argyle, and then LaForge. Just like technically you have Picard and what's his name, Jellicoe, being captains of the Enterprise D for all of one episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to say I'm going to let you look this up, but without looking it up, I'm going to guess that there's 3 chief engineers, and I think one of the names is Logan, one of the names is Argyle, and I cannot remember that lady's name. I swear her name is not said, but you said it was, so I'll let you go find that. So yeah, let's talk about it. Salute to matte paintings. There aren't any in this episode. There's some crazy special effects. I checked some behind the scenes writing, and no, those were not matte paintings. Those were actually special effects done with just some camera work and some lighting work. They look awesome in the tradition of 2001 Space Odyssey, as already said, but can't count them as a matte painting. But now we're going to talk about Enterprise interiors. I already talked about main engineering a little bit, and the silly elevator that takes you from one floor to the other or one deck to the other in main engineering. But I want to highlight another part of the Enterprise interior, and that is the Master Systems Display Table, aka the pool table. I love this piece of the Enterprise. This is going to be an interior that we're going to use a lot, and I love this piece because this is where the end of the episode takes place, where the Traveler sits on one side of that screen, and then Kaczynski sits on the other side, and they're able to figure out a way to get the Enterprise back home. Actually, that's the location where the Traveler just straight up disappears from. He starts turning invisible and then bing, just disappears. So, yeah, I love the pool table, love Master Systems display table. Wish I had a replica in my own place, like as an island in my kitchen. I think that'd be incredible. That's a gift that, maybe one of our patrons can support sometime. But what'd you
Maybe.
find out about the chief engineer?
So I just want to make the comment that when you said the traveler disappears into thin air, is it reasonable to assume that he became one with the Force?
Exactly.
I know we're a Star Trek
Exactly.
group, but there's that
Like you said, yeah, that kind of feels a lot more like that, though.
more Star Warsy than Star Trek. Her name is McDougal.
McDougal,
MacDougal,
nice.
MacDougal. So you got
Argyle and McDougal. And someone's got to go check out Logan. I swear Logan's going to be one of as the chief engineer. That's either before or after these two. I can't remember.
Yeah, there you go. We'll figure it out. I'm going through these real meticulously. It's something that, given the pandemic right now, it's something I enjoy doing, and I love the addition of the pool table there. That's great. So as we're wrapping this up, big mahalo nui loa. That's Hawaiian for deepest thanks to all our listeners. Any feedback that you have, folks, greatly appreciated. This is something that we're both trying to use for our practices. In terms of public history, I can find some applications for this for my students, and definitely with Scholar Beta, with his students, I think everybody could benefit from that. So thank you for your support on that. Scholar Beta, do you have some other thank yous?
Yeah, I want to give a shout out for sure to Memory Alpha. I'm using that website as a way to check the names. I'm taking detailed notes while we're watching this, but Memory Alpha is invaluable in helping me catch the spelling and double checking the names of all the aliens and characters that we're coming across. Also want to thank Trek Core for the scripts and some screencasts that I've been grabbing and using and studying, especially those Blu-ray caps. I don't have a copy of that Blu-ray for all the seasons. Only have seen select episodes on Blu-ray. They look beautiful. I'm very grateful for that. And also grateful for the listeners who are coming along in the Captain's Yacht. There's plenty of space for as many listeners as possible. And yeah, throw in the comments what we're getting right, what else you want to know about. And like we said, we'll be responsive because we're trying to model what up and coming podcasters should be like. We're responsive to the audience, trying things out, getting material up there, and not perseverating so much on everything, but just trying to have an authentic conversation about something that's incredible, and, which TNG definitely is, without a doubt, I can say. So I think that's what I've got for this episode. Grateful again for your joining me on this this retrospective, this journey through the next generation. Can't wait to hit up next week. Do we know what we got next week? What stories we're hitting?
Lonely Among Us is one. I had it up. So we got Lonely Among Us. I want to say Justice.
Oh, yeah.
So let me pull this up real quick I am so glad I bought these on iTunes.
Oh, yeah, nice.
Yep, so okay, Lonely Among Us, Justice, and The Battle.
And The Battle, absolutely. Yeah, can't wait to get into those. Okay, well, I think at Scholar Beta, signing off.
And Captain Kanaka, Monocle Enterprises on Teachers Pay Teachers, if you're interested in exploring my stuff. With that and all said, live long and prosper. As they say in Hawaii, e malama pono, which means take care, be safe, and be healthy. And we'll see you all later.
Peace and long life.
All right.
Nice.